Economist Forum's EconProdigy 7. I was also here at EconProdigy 6, so it's a great feeling to be back at the university where I studied and to see this large crowd of young people who are interested in policymaking and want to do something for the country on a Friday morning. So thank you all for coming for this workshop. So today it will be similar to what I did last time. I don't think, did anyone also participate in EconProdigy 6? Can you raise your hand if there's anyone? Okay, one or two, just two, right? So I did change things up a little bit this time. Of course, the theme is a bit different. It's inclusivity, equity, inclusivity, and sustainability. So in my workshop today, what I will be doing is I'll go through the themes of the presenting, of the competition, which is equity, inclusivity, sustainability, and then I'll get into the the background of what kind of work you might need, what kind of things will help you with your presentation when you're doing it in person actually, and finally how to make the presentation itself. So initially I'll just go through some basic stuff because I feel that most of you here are from different universities and different disciplines and different times of your undergraduate degrees. So I will try and bring some of you to the same level playing field so that while we start this contest, everybody has some basic idea about the things that we're going to be working on, right? And before I begin, I want to thank Young Economist Forum for inviting me here, and it's a pleasure to be part of EconProdigy, and hopefully in the coming years as well, we'll be able to collaborate both with the Center for Policy Dialogue and possibly with the United Nations Development Program. And one disclaimer is that I have come here today in my personal capacity, so whatever I say is my own opinion and does not reflect that of UNDP. So with that said, I'll get started, and I think I'll also move around a little. So let's start with equity, and maybe many of you have probably seen this picture, and there's this difference between equality and equity. So equality is easier to understand, everybody is equal, but with equity, what happens is that you try and account for the differences that people have, and then based on those differences, you give them more or less so that their outcomes are equal. So that is equity. But over here in this picture, what's not here is also inequality. So it should start, actually, the worst case scenario is basically inequality. So you start at a very unequal position. Then maybe you're equal if everybody has the same resources. But then if you really want to do justice, then you should go for equity, and you should consider the differences that people start with and give them different resources so that they can have the same outcomes. So this distinction, I think, will be useful for you later on when you are dealing with your presentation and your cases. So keep this in mind. But of course, in economics, equality is more widely discussed. Equity is also discussed nowadays, but equality is the big issue. Inequality is the big issue. And one of the economists who first started talking about this was Nobel laureate Amartya Sen. He wrote 2 books on income inequality, and I think inequality re-examined, 2 books. So there it goes into very deep analysis about equality of what. Is it income? Is it wealth? Or is it rights and privileges? And then how equality is related to freedom and development and all that. So those of you who are interested, I highly recommend you check those things out. And also there's a detailed discussion about how to measure inequality. Today also I'll show you how to measure inequality, but more of the basic stuff rather than the details analysis. So in economics, generally economic inequality we think of is of 3 kinds. There is wealth inequality, there is income inequality, and there is consumption inequality. And more often than not, wealth inequality is the one which is the greatest problem and which is of the greatest magnitude. So if you have, for instance, two very rich people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett having lunch, then they are probably much richer than everybody else at the restaurant. So the wealth difference between them and everybody else in the restaurant is going to be huge. So wealth inequality is always the greatest. Income inequality will be, not all that different. There will be, of course, differences, but maybe what you'll realize is that super rich people don't actually have much income. Their money comes from somewhere else. And consumption inequality will be the least. Probably Warren Buffett will be having a similar meal there compared to everybody else at the restaurant. So consumption inequality is the least. Income inequality is a little more. Wealth inequality is the greatest inequality. So in terms of magnitude, if you go towards wealth inequality, you'll see more inequality. In consumption inequality, there's less inequality. But in terms of measurement and in terms of data, it's always easier to measure and to find data for consumption inequality, because consumption can be easily tracked, it can be easily found, and you can easily get data for consumption inequality. The next comes income inequality. Income inequality is slightly harder to measure and find out, but you can still do it. Wealth inequality is very difficult to measure and actually get data for. And so we think of measurements. There are many ways of measuring inequality, but any kind of measurement, and maybe you will also explore different ways of measuring inequality, but all these measures, they should have 4 basic characteristics for them to be good measures. And by the way, some of the measures are more widely used than others, but it doesn't mean that they are perfect. They have their own limitations. So these 4 characteristics, any measure of inequality should have. And the first one is basically called the anonymity principle. That means that we're not interested in who has the income or who has the wealth or who is consuming. Whoever it is, it doesn't really matter. Even if we switch the people, the overall measure of inequality will remain the same. Then is the population principle, that it's not about absolute numbers, it's about proportions. So if you have a larger country, if you have more people, it doesn't mean that you'll have more inequality or less inequality. That is there. The other is the relative income principle. Again, it's the relative differences. So if everybody gets twice as rich, inequality can still be the same. And if everybody becomes poor, inequality can still be the same. So that is also there. And finally, the Dalton principle or the transfer principle, that if you can transfer wealth or income, generally wealth or income, consumption can be transferred. So if you transfer from the rich to the poor, inequality should fall. And if you transfer from the poor to the rich, then inequality should rise. So these are the 4 characteristics that any good measure of inequality should have. And generally, the measures that we use more often, that you'll find in your textbooks, those of you who are studying economics, you'll find that there's something called the Lorenz curve. So it's very easy to understand. If you take all the people in your country, so on the y-axis is the percentage of income recipients. So these are all the people in your country. And on the x-axis is the percentage of income recipients, all the people in your country. On the vertical, on the y-axis, you have the percentage of income. So income is vertically distributed, people are distributed horizontally, and if you just plot that how much of the national income goes to the 10% of the people, then how much goes to 20%. So if you just plot it out with the actual data, then you'll get a curve like this, which is called the Lorenz curve. And because of some mathematical magic, it will always be something like a curve which will be below the diagonal line, which we call the line of equality. So line of equality, if you're on the line of equality, it means everybody has the same income in the country. So that usually doesn't happen. We're usually always below the line of equality. And with Lorenz curves, the closer you go to the line of equality, the less inequality there is. So if you're closer to the line of equality, the country is more equal. And if you're further away from the line of equality, then the country is less equal. So that's how it goes. And from the Lorenz curve comes the most widely used measure of inequality, which is the Gini coefficient. And Gini coefficient is basically calculated through the Lorenz curve using this formula. And Gini coefficient is usually between 0 and 1, where 0 indicates perfect equality, everybody is equal. 1 indicates perfect inequality, where everybody, only one person has all the income in the whole country, right? So that is the Gini coefficient. Few things that you should be careful about. Lorenz curves can sometimes cross, and also the same Gini coefficient can have different Lorenz curves. So I won't go into detail of how that happens, but please do keep that in mind while you are doing your analysis. So let's look at some of the numbers for Bangladesh, right? So I told you Gini coefficient is from 0 to 1, where 1 is the most unequal society that you can imagine, and 0 is the most equal. And here we have data from Bangladesh Household Income and Expenditure Survey. This is a nationally representative household survey done by Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. We have data from 1991 all the way to 2022. And the blue bars represent the national Gini coefficient of income inequality, and the orange and gray bars are urban and rural, basically. So if you look at the blue bars, we started off at 0.39 in 1992, and by the time we reached 2022, we were at 0.5. And 0.5 is the kind of place where you don't want to be. Anything which is 0.5 or higher is considered like very high inequality. So inequality over time in Bangladesh, income inequality over time in Bangladesh has increased as per the data. But of course, Gini coefficient is not always the most revealing of statistics. Another way of looking at it, and this approach was popularized by French economist Thomas Piketty. He wrote a very influential and widely selling book in 2014 when I was doing my undergrad. It was called Capital in the 21st Century, and it was very popular and very widely sold. So he kind of popularized this approach of thinking about inequality. He said that Gini coefficients give you a number, but it doesn't really show the real picture. What's more interesting is if you take the incomes of the top 5% of the population and the incomes of the bottom 5% of the population, and then you just divide these out and you find out how much rich are the richest compared to the poorest. So this is what it is right here. Income share held by the richest 5% as a multiple of the income share held by the poorest 5% in Bangladesh. In 1992, the richest 5% in Bangladesh were 18 times richer than the poorest 5% of the population. In 2022, they were 81 times richer than the poorest 5% of the population. So here you see the drastic increase in income inequality in Bangladesh, right? So now let's move to the next theme because we have plenty to cover. This is inclusivity. Again, a very broad topic, but I'll try and cover a few things. So what is an inclusive society? And this, according to, I think this is from UNDESA, yeah. So according to UNDESA, an inclusive society is one where there's equal rights, opportunities, and dignity for all, where there is active participation of all citizens in policy making and decision making. There's social justice, there's fair distribution of resources. So this is where I want you to think a little, pause and think a little, that here we're talking about fair distribution of resources. So that brings us back to equality and equity and inequality. So inevitably, equality, equity, and inequality are linked with inclusivity. And inclusivity is further again linked with justice and social justice. So keep that in mind. So that is there. There is respect for diversity and tolerance, and there is trust and empowerment, so on. So it's a kind of like a fairy tale kind of world where everything's going well. And here, what I've done is that I've given you some of the characteristics of an inclusive society. So on the right side, you have the characteristics of the inclusive society, whereas on the left side, you see all the characteristics of a not so inclusive society. So then you can actually read these and think where we stand and where we need to work on a little more, maybe. And inclusion features broadly in everything that you see around you. In most corporate in most corporations, actually, they have equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. They also have a environment, social, and governance policy. So basically, the theme of this year's EconProdigy is very much linked to those two policies. And obviously, the United Nations, in its charter, the UN Charter is the document which started the United Nations as an international organization. So, of course, within the UN Charter also, you'll see plenty of focus and highlight on inclusivity. It mentions we the people. It mentions that all people are equal, or nations are equal, and there is no discrimination, and so on. And this theme is also there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where also you will see that it specifically mentions that everybody is born free and equal, and everybody has the right to take part in government, work, education, etc. And recently, what has happened is that inclusivity has become a central theme in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So that is called the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. I think you've heard of them. So inclusivity features very prominently in the 2030 Agenda. And the way it comes here is through this idea of leave no one behind. So in case of economic development, we don't want to leave anyone behind. Everybody should be benefiting from development so that nobody is left behind. So this leave no one behind concept is now very common and popular, and you'll see this not only in UN documents, but also in national policy documents. You'll see this leave no one behind kind of approach. And so what is it? Who are the people who are usually left behind, right? So these people are left behind for various reasons. Sometimes they're left behind because of discrimination. So there's discrimination, there's prejudice against certain groups of people because of their age, class, disability, religion, nationality, whatever. So these people sometimes get left behind. Other people get left behind because they were born in the wrong place. They were born in a place which is very vulnerable to shocks and climate change. They're born in a place where there is conflict and war. So these people are often left behind because of their geographic location, right? Other people are also left behind because of governance failures. Like there are people who become stuck in their lives and in their careers because of corruption and because of the governance structure which doesn't favor them, and because they are not close to powerful people. So they also get left behind. And socioeconomic status can also be a reason for people getting left behind. Like in the United States, you see wherever you go in every state, there are very good world-class universities in every state. But people can't afford those universities. So people are left behind. They see these good institutions, but they can't go there because they can't afford that education. So that is some way that they are left behind. And of course, shocks and fragility are also ways in which people get left behind. If there's a natural disaster, if there's a war, or anything of that nature, that can also push people back in terms of development. So how can we make sure that no one is left behind, and how can we make things more inclusive? So the first thing that we need to do is visibility. So those who are the left behind groups in society, they need to be visible, they need to be counted, they need to be accounted for. So unless you know who they are, how many of them there are, so you cannot actually design policies for them. This visibility is very important. it's also linked to this concept of statistical invisibility. So sometimes the most vulnerable people in society, they're statistically invisible. There's no data on them. Nobody really knows how many of them there are, what their problems are. And so ultimately, policy is also never made for them. So visibility is important. These people need to be visible. You need to know who they are, how many of them there are. Then is consideration. That is that while you make policies, you consider their issues and their problems and their, different challenges that they're facing, right? The second part is consideration. The third part is access, that whoever is left behind needs to be someone who will get access to economic opportunities, access to decision making, and access to participation in the civic process and parliamentary process and so on. And then you need to ensure that they have their rights in terms of legal rights, human rights, and all sorts of rights. And finally, they should have the resources so that they can fulfill their potential and they're not left behind. So now I move to the third theme, which is sustainability. I am sorry that I'm just going on because I'll do this in the more old school way. I'll finish through and then we'll take questions. So please bear with me for now. So we move to sustainability. Sustainability is, again, a very commonly heard term in corporate culture, in policy making. One very popular definition of sustainability is the practice of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So another more kind of technical way of looking at it is that you have some resources. These resources are either renewable or non-renewable. If they're non-renewable, they're going to run out anyway. If they are renewable, then you use your resources in such a way that you can keep using them for a long time. So you don't use them so fast that they run out quickly. So that's the most easy way of thinking about it. And usually sustainability is a broad term, so it includes economic issues, it includes environmental issues, it includes social issues, and it's the kind of interlinkage of all these three domains of issues that bring sustainability together, right? And of course, sustainability is important because the economy and the environment are interconnected, and they are intricately interconnected and inseparably interconnected. There is no way that we can actually separate the economy from the environment. We cannot do our economic activities on planet Earth and then take all our pollution to planet Mars. Everything happens here. All our resources are depleted here. All our waste goes back to the same place. So we have no other option. So if you look at this diagram, those of you who are from economics, in the center part, you can probably recognize it looks something like a circular flow of income. This was first put forward by François Quasnay, again, French economist. So it was called economic table, but from the table, the diagram looks something like this, that there are households and firms. Households are consuming, firms are producing, and there are inputs and outputs. It goes round and round. For households, the inputs are the labor into the firms, and the firms produce outputs which the households again buy, and so this cycle goes on and on. But of course, this economy is not in isolation. This economy is right in the middle of the natural environment. And the natural environment is supplying inputs into the economy, which the economy is using. And the economy is producing waste products, solid waste, air pollution, waste heat, water pollution, which is going back into the natural environment. So for this reason, the economy and environment are intricately and inseparably linked. And because of this, economic decisions have impact on the natural environment, something which we call externalities. So externalities mean that if the decision is made by a producer or a consumer, and if that decision affects some other producer or consumer who was not part of the decision-making process, then it's an externality, right? And if it affects them in a good way, it's a positive externality. If it affects them in a bad way, it's a negative externality. And environmental issues are usually very much negative externalities, right? And this is why the discussion around sustainability is so important in the modern world. And of course, two things that those of you who are from physics you'll probably remember is that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, they only change forms. So what this means for us in environmental economics is that all resource use generates waste, excessive waste harms ecosystems and the human well-being. So we have to keep in mind that whatever we do has an impact on the environment. And of course, the second law is always there, that energy transformation is never fully efficient. And this means that there will always be a limit to how much growth we can pursue. There's a limit to how many resources also we have. And we are running out of resources very quickly. And important things like rare earth metals, which are used in semiconductors, are becoming very scarce, and countries are going to economic tariff wars because of this, right? And of course, I have to show you this, that there is something called the Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals broadly agreed by all countries of the world in 2015 that they are going to pursue in the next 15 years till 2030. And many of these goals are directly related to the environment. And you will get data on all of these goals. There are many targets and indicators under these goals. You will get data on a lot of these things online for Bangladesh and other countries as well. And the global, actually, sustainability agenda is highly influenced by the SDGs. So it's good if you know your SDGs a little. Okay, so now we move to the next part, which is the primer on research. I'm not going to read out the whole thing because it's quite long. I've kept some of these things for you to read later on your own in your free time while you will be preparing for the contest, and BF will ensure that all of you get hold of this. So I've kept some of these material as instructional kind of things. So I'll just go through these quickly before I run out of time. So of course, this is not formal research per se, but in order to participate in this contest, you will have to do some form of research, very preliminary and very short and very small scale, but still nevertheless some research. So research is a process, it's a systematic process of inquiry for answering questions, solving problems, and finding new and better ways to answer questions and solve problems. And it's more than just finding things online. It's a lot of work that goes behind research. And every research starts with the research question, and any good research question should be a smart research question. And smart means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. So please go through the examples, you'll understand what I mean. The more specific it is, it's better. If it's a very general question, like what is life and why am I here and all these things, so it's hard to answer such questions. And if it's not measurable, then your findings will always be in debate. Of course, if it's measurable, it will still be debated, but it's better if it's measurable. It should be achievable. That's something that you can do within your resources and your ability and your time. And it should also be something which is relevant to the problems of the day. Unless, of course, you're an archaeologist or historian, you should always work with issues which are relevant to the problems of the day. And it should be something which is time-bound, that you can complete within the given time. Usually, most people don't have forever to do research, and neither do you, so that also you need to keep in mind. So once you have your research question, you need to ask yourself a few more questions. First question is what? So what means what is your research question? You already have your research question. And BF will help you find your research question by giving you these themes and cases and all these things. So you'll have some motivation for that. But once you have your research question, the next question is, so what? That means that why is the research question important? So here you need to find out what kind of research was done on this topic previously. So you need to do your literature review. So literature review, I would say, is more than just, reading 10 papers and citing them and just writing 2 paragraphs. It is basically to an exercise to find out what was done on this topic previously, who are the ones who worked on this, who are the thought leaders on this topic, who are the ones who have opposing views on these ideas. That means you develop a kind of holistic knowledge about the topic of your research, and then you become kind of like an expert on the topic itself without even doing the rest of the paper yet. So that is actually the literature review. And if for those of you who will do like PhD or a formal research job, you'll see that literature review is going to be quite a big task. And it's not, even with all the AI and all the online tools we have, it's still not as easy or as straightforward as it seems. You will have to look and you'll have to find things and even read books and things like that. So once so the literature review, the reason why you're doing the literature review is to explain why the topic of your research is important. So justify the reason why you're doing this. And then is the question of now what? So you have your research question, you know why it's important. So now what? How do you answer the research question? So this is the issue of your methodology, that what methods will you follow? And in most cases, we will be following methods which are widely accepted and which have already been used and which have already been shown to be successful. Unless, of course, the topic of your research itself is to find the method. In that case, you come up with your own methodology. But generally, at our level, we usually don't do methodological papers. We do empirical papers. That means we use someone else's method and we come up with new findings and analysis based on data. So that is your now what, your methodology. And then is the then what. So you have your methodology, you have your results now also. So then what? How are these results important? How are these results new? How are these results different from what was there before? Or how is it similar to what was there before? What is your contribution to the knowledge, right? So I'll skip some of these things and I'll talk a little bit about this thing, that what are the characteristics of a good research? Good research builds on the work of others. If you think you've come up with a completely original idea, 3 things can happen. It might be a completely original idea, which is probably not. It also might be that you think it's an original idea, but you haven't done your literature review deeply enough or widely enough to find out someone else who also had this idea before. And the third thing could be is that maybe it is an original idea, but it was not considered by anyone else before for research, probably. So that's why it usually builds on the work of others. The greatest researchers like Isaac Newton and others have built on the work of others. It's called the standing on the shoulder of giants effect. So most people build on the work of others. So it's important to know what kind of other work was done before while you do your research. Good research is a blend of logic and imagination. You have to be very logical and methodical and very systematic. But at the same time, you need to have some imagination, some creativity, because you are going to have something new in your paper or in your presentation. Otherwise, why are we doing this in the first place? And good research tries to identify and avoid bias. So if there is any bias, then you yourself try and anticipate what the bias could be. You identify it and you try to avoid it, or you do some methods to correct for that bias. Good research is always repeatable, replicable. That means it is done in a structured, methodical way, and the steps are all detailed out and recorded very methodically, so that anybody who wants to do this again can repeat the same steps and get the same results. So that is good research. And if someone repeats your same steps and gets different results, then that is problematic. And if you don't even tell anyone how you did this, then that's even worse, right? And good research is generalizable to other settings. So the more general your findings are, the better it is. So partial equilibrium is good, general equilibrium even better. So special relativity is good, general relativity even far better, right? So the more general it is, the better. If it's very narrow, that your findings only apply to this auditorium room on this Friday morning, then it's not very interesting. Good research should be systematic with structured and specific steps. You don't do things arbitrarily on ad hoc basis. You have steps that you follow, and it generates new questions, and it's apolitical in the sense that it's not trying to push any political agenda. And by political agenda, I mean any agenda actually. Like for instance, if there is a research funded by a tobacco company on why electronic cigarettes are beneficial for health, then that is problematic, right? So you get the idea. So now I'll move ahead quickly. Qualities of a good researcher, you will understand on your own. I'll move on. Finding information. This also I will not get into too much detail. I'll just tell you that find information from your credible sources, right? Don't just read anything online or see anything on YouTube and put that in your case, because that is going to weaken your presentation significantly. And newspaper is not always the best source for finding information. What you should do is you should go to Google Scholar and find out peer-reviewed, double-blind peer-reviewed journal articles published in international reputed journals. That is the best source. Other good sources, so you can also use SciSpace, which is an AI-enabled literature review tool. SciSpace also draws its papers from Google Scholar, but please be aware that the SciSpace can be inaccurate at times, so it's always best to read your own papers. You can also unlock locked papers using this. Don't tell anyone I showed you this. I'll quickly move on. There's also this Library Genesis for unlocking books, and Anna's Archive also for unlocking books. With books, it's great to download books, read only the parts you need, and include them in your paper, and forget about the rest of the book. That's how researchers read books. We don't read books like storybooks. We read books to find out specific information that we need for our paper, right? So always consider books, because many people ignore them, and then whoever doesn't ignore them, they have an advantage. And here I've given you some important sources of local data. All the links are given, so you can browse through them and find the things that you need. More than you need actually is here. So this might be useful for you. This is all official data. Try to use local data if local data is available. If it's not available, go for the global sources as well if you want. And remember that data should come from the original source. So if you see on the newspaper it's written GDP is 5%, don't take it for granted. Go to BBS, go to the actual source and find the actual data for GDP. Again, the same things. And citing and referencing, although you'll just be making a presentation, I highly recommend that you cite your sources, like, put a small little box like I did, like if you recall some of my other slides, I'll show you. I'll just go back a little. Sorry. Like over here even, or where is it? You get the idea. Like over there, you see the small source is there. So the moment you mention the source, the credibility increases. I did not make this up. It was there, published in a book, and somebody did research on this. So, and I did not make up my numbers, or I did not tell AI to make up my numbers. I found it from a database which was published by the government or some international organization, and this data came from surveys of real people and real households, right? So always include your sources. It's always good if you do. because that really helps with your credibility. Otherwise, people will think you're making things up out of nowhere. So try and include your sources. And while you are writing papers, it's always good to cite and reference properly. Over here, I've just given you some idea that citing and referencing is important, why it's important. And without citing and referencing, you fall into plagiarism, which is going to be really bad for you in this competition and also in later on in life. So now let's go into thinking critically, which will be crucial for you to succeed in this contest. I'll just go into the major issues that we face while thinking critically. The first problem is egocentric thinking. Egocentric thinking means that living with the unrealistic but confident sense that we have fundamentally figured out the way things are, even though we did not appreciate the point of view of others or the limitations in our own point of view. That means that thinking that I already know everything and everybody else is wrong. So the moment you think this way, your critical thinking is going to stop and you will not be able to proceed further in your research or in your analysis. So don't fall into this trap that you know everything. Start with the belief that you don't know and you are here to learn, right? The other problem which can happen, and because this is a group contest, is sociocentric thinking. That means uncritically internalizing the dominant prejudices of society or culture without seeing or facing the truth in our thoughts and actions. So you just think like everyone else without even thinking why you're thinking this way. So if this happens in your group, then also you are not going in the right direction. Probably you will not do so well in the contest. So don't fall into this trap. Don't just think like everyone else. Have your own say, have your own ideas, and discuss among yourselves to find the best ideas and solutions, right? And these two things combined, actually, what they do is they prevent us from seeing the reality, because we think we are always correct and our group is so great and everybody else is wrong. And so then we are, prevented from seeing the real world, and we fall into this trap of not thinking critically, and that will be very damaging for you in this kind of policy contest, and also not very good for you as a researcher in your life later. So don't fall into these traps. Try to think critically as much as possible. I've given you all the things, and also in my slides in some places, I think there are videos. No, these don't have. There's a video there. So wherever you see the video links, go and watch the videos. Some of these video links will be quite interesting and thought-provoking, I think. So let's move on to logical reasoning. I'll try and finish up quickly. Logical fallacies often occur. Fallacy is error in thinking or reasoning. It's not an error in fact. So round two will be debates, and lots of great debaters will be coming to this contest. And so it's very important that you have your logic right, your logical reasoning right. So whatever conclusion that you come from should come from the premise that you started with. Otherwise, it seems awkward. And in terms of research, whatever recommendations you give should come from your findings. It should not come from your heart. It should not come from your neighbor. It should come from your findings. So that is where you can be logical in your research as well. So many kinds of logical fallacies are there. Broadly, there are three kinds here that I've mentioned. Those who are from NSU in English 105, they teach you more than 80 kinds. But broadly, there are like three kinds: irrelevance, confusion, and oversimplification. Irrelevance means that a conclusion is based on some statement which is irrelevant. So you make an argument, but your final conclusion is based on something which is not relevant to this whole thing, right? So that is a problem. The second is confusion. Incorrect conclusion is reached because ambiguity or confusion is there in the meanings of the words. So you don't really understand the technical words or something in there. So you come to a false conclusion, something which is not supposed to be there. And oversimplification, that you jump to the conclusion without actually following the logical sequence of the argument. And so any argument has 3 or 4 elements. There is a premise, that is the basis for the argument. The premise can be true or false. Then you have the flow, that is from the premise to the conclusion. So the flow from the premise to the conclusion can be logical or illogical. Even if your premise is false, your flow could still be quite logical. But then that would actually decide whether your conclusion is valid or invalid, and whether your argument is sound or unsound. So to give you an example, over here you see only the one on the left side is a sound and valid argument. Everything else here has some problem, right? But often we start with something which is correct, but we end up with something which is not correct anymore, because the way we have done our reasoning, there's a problem in our reasoning, not in our facts. The way we think is sometimes problematic, and we can lead us into our own traps. So be aware of that while you are in round 2. This will be quite important for you, especially the rebound kind of things, like, because in the debate, the first round you come prepared, but the second round you kind of respond to the other team, and so that's where your skill shows, right? Unsuccessful arguments, why some arguments are not so successful? They don't look at the evidence very thoroughly. They ignore the evidence. The evidence itself is not accurate. It's made up, or it's not from a good source. And the conclusion has not clearly and incontrovertibly come from the evidence. So the conclusion came from somewhere else. It came from their heart, it came from their feelings, but it did not come from the argument and the evidence and the findings. So how can you be a better logical reasoning person? So you can follow these 14 tips. Don't think in absolutes. So it's never like, it's always like this or never like this. Don't think in absolutes. Don't generalize too much. Avoid emotional language. Use evidence, and evidence should be relevant. Credentials should be relevant. Like, I assume I am a relevant person to talk about economics, but if somebody else came in, then credentials should also be relevant. Conclusion should come from the evidence. The steps should not be omitted, and so on. So these were some tips for you to improve your logical reasoning. Now, coming to the writing part, the one thing I'd like to say is that we are now in the age of artificial intelligence. So please be aware of AI tools. Everyone in this contest will be using AI tools. So by using these tools, you are not getting any advantage which the other groups don't have. What the other groups don't have is the brain that is inside your skull, on your shoulders. That is yours, and that you can use uniquely and to your advantage, without anybody else being able to use it. So keep that in mind. Everybody is going to use AI. So if you use AI, it's not going to help you in any way which anyone else hasn't figured it out yet. And besides this competition, in general, plagiarism is completely unacceptable in research. If you do plagiarism, your career is over instantly. And also in academics, like if you're a teacher, it's also really bad. So don't do plagiarism. Come up with your own original ideas. Even if your ideas are really quirky and really interesting, that also sometimes helps. Like, I recently was at a conference where someone came up with a very strange idea, but it was his original idea, and everyone appreciated that person, even though that idea cannot be very feasible or anything like that, but everyone appreciated him. So try and be original. Don't do plagiarism. Don't do copy paste, and paraphrase the things that you take from other places. You can use AI to paraphrase as well, but don't depend on it too much. Don't let it dictate what you want to do. And also with AI, be careful, because AI is not always correct. AI has lots of bias. AI has data privacy issues. AI is based on data collected in the global north, in the US and other places. So AI has its own set of problems. So try and be very careful of that. These are some things which UNESCO has pointed out that researchers should be careful about while using generative AI. And so I'm just pointing these out for you in the upfront, so you are also very careful about AI use in this contest. And here there are some very general and broad tips for you to improve your academic writing. You will not be writing a paper per se in this contest, but there will be some writing involved while you are, preparing the presentations and all those things in the background. So these are some general tips for you. I'll just quickly move on to the next part, which is working with numbers, I think. Yeah, so working with numbers. So when working with numbers, be careful about the units, don't mess them up. Bangladeshi units are not the same as international units. Try and use only one kind of units in one slide, or otherwise it becomes very confusing. Also show the units that you have been using in your calculation or your analysis. Show them like what it is. Is it 1,000 crore or is it billion or what it is? Try and show them. Convert the units carefully. Some people have problems calculating percentage change. Remember, percentage change and percentage point and basis point, all these things very confusing. Don't get confused. I have just pointed these out for this reason. Also remember that every kind of statistical analysis cannot be done with every kind of data. So this is like a checklist for you, that what kind of data do you have, what kind of analysis can you do. Broadly, data is of two types, categorical and continuous. Categorical means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Continuous means 1, 2, 3. Categorical again is divided into two groups, nominal and ordinal. Nominal means Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just the names. Ordinal means that you can order these, like brigadier general and lieutenant general. So these are ranks. Continuous can be interval or ratio. Interval is basically same magnitude between the intervals, and ratio is one which has true zero value. So these things you probably know from statistics, but don't do crazy things with your data. Look at the data and let the data tell you a story. So while making the policy presentation, try and be specific and clear on what you're actually trying to say, and always try to show the other side of the story as well. Even if you are very invested in one point of view, also try and show the other point of view and say why it might not be such a great idea. Because if you are very one-sided, it's very hard for people to take you for granted and to take you as a researcher or as an intellectual. Maybe in politics you can be, but in in research and in this kind of a situation, it's best if you show both pros and cons. And also in policy making, for policymakers, it's always important to understand the pros and cons before they make any decision. In terms of successful policy presentations, it's important that you start off strong. You focus on the big picture. You keep things simple. Don't use too much jargon. Stay on time. Time will be crucial. Some people come with very big ambition, like myself, and then they run out of time. So don't do that in the contest. Also, try and keep the slides clean as far as possible. Have one idea per slide. Don't take inspiration from my slides, because this is meant to be more instructional. This is not my competition slide, right? So this is more instructional, something you might be reading later on. So that's why it has so much text. But try and keep it less text. One idea per slide is always good. Use data if required. Make sure every data you use has a purpose, why you're including it. Colors can be useful, but don't use too much. Use visuals, but the right kind of visuals. Tables, not so good in presentations, maybe in research papers. Graphs are always better in presentations. And text should be readable. I hope people in the back can read my text. I have too much, I think, but text should be readable and legible. And also the color contrast of your presentation also should be easy to read. Like this is obviously easy to read. And this is not like a prescription for you that this is the only way that you should make your presentations, but this is something that you can try. This is something which MIT also recommends for policy presentations, that you start with the main takeaway of your presentation. Then you have 3 major points, and with each major point, you give your supporting claims. And then when you end your presentation, you again mention your major takeaway once again. So this is like a package of how you can approach your presentation. This is not a prescription. Feel free to do things in your own way, but this is something that you can do if you want. And I think we're done. Yes, so thank you. So we can take questions now.
So, if anyone has any questions to ask Yusuf, Saadat sir, and insights on how to go over different segments of this conversation, you can ask him right now.
আমি এখান থেকে কথা বলবো। হ্যাঁ, এখান থেকে বলি তাহলে মাইক একটা নিয়ে যাও।